Hey, Professor Wilson here. I wanted to take some time to talk to you a little bit about your line work and some of the ways that I think we can improve it. So, of course, let me first off by saying that you've got some really strong line work here. You have already obviously spent a lot of time practicing this and are quite proficient at it. But I do think there's some things that we can do to make this even better. So let me just dive in and see if I can give you some pointers and just a little critique that I think will help push you to the next level. So, first of all, when it comes to making line work, we want strong, confident strokes. And as you see the process of me going about this, I go stroke after stroke after stroke. Fortunately, I have a big 27-inch Cintiq and I have the EK remote that I can use. And so I have a remote control. I've got Command Z programmed. Of course, you can do this on your keyboard as well, but it definitely helps to have like a more ergonomic button setup for undo because you're going to be undoing a lot. So having that ready, that'll make it a little bit easier for you to go through stroke after stroke until you get just the one you want. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to making strokes is sometimes your stroke isn't going to align with the drawing that you have underneath, but it's just a beautiful line. There's no reason if you make a perfect line that you just love and adore and it's a little wider or it changes the shape ever so slightly, this is your drawing, so feel free to go ahead and to keep that new line if you think it's better. You'll see I've done that here. Some of your shapes, I'm simplifying them down, doing more general curves and general shapes because I think it just looks a little bit better. Second of all, you want to make sure that your lines taper, and sometimes that can be difficult to do. And so it actually helps if you rotate the canvas. You can actually rotate your canvas in Photoshop. If you've got a tablet, you can set up your touch ring to rotate, and then you can get a much better ergonomic kind of feel to the pen. So this way you can get those nice tapers. You want to make sure that your lines taper off as they get ready to pass behind a object. So in this case, we have, let's say, the line that is going to go from the back of the jacket behind this arm. We want to make sure that tapers off a lot. That's really going to help us understand that that line is passing behind it. We also would like lines to kind of just taper at the end in general, and especially if there's going to be a thicker line that's going to pass in front of it. Remember, we always want to put thicker lines in front of thinner lines, never thinner lines on top of thicker lines. So always being really conscious about that. With some of these angles here, I find it's easier to kind of start at the corner and then do one line out and let that taper off, and then go back to that corner and then do the second line and let that taper. A lot of times I will do really, really long strokes and kind of overshoot a lot of things and then just use my eraser to erase it back on that line, to erase it back or give it the extra bit of tapering that I need. I do that all the time. I overshoot my lines all the time and then just kind of erase back whatever kind of taper that I need. You can see my red arrows here. These are just indicating some places where I've thinned them out. Either they're passing behind or they are, being designed to create a lighter feel, or there's a nice thick line that's going to be on top of them. So we want to make sure that that thick line has a chance to have the dominance that it needs. Typically, when it comes to like how thick or thin my line should be, I don't really increase or decrease the size of my brush really very much at all because I try to treat it like I would an actual marker. So just use the pen weight variation that's built in. If I'm going to have a thicker line, I tend to keep those thick lines on the outer perimeter of my shape. So in this case, the outside of the arm, you could even say maybe the inside of the jacket, but I keep it all on the outer perimeter. Basically, so if my character were to be walking around against a background, it helps the silhouette to pop out. I don't tend to put a lot of thick lines on the interior space, and certainly never for any kind of details. So we've got these thin wrinkles and things like that. Those definitely should remain thin. So if I'm going to use thick lines, I'm going to keep those thick lines to the outer side. If you look to the right of her arm near her deltoid and to the right of the forearm, that's where I've used a darker, thicker line because it helps to pull it out from the background. Going through some of these interior lines, definitely keep them very thin and let the kind of the medium lines be more for structure. You'll see here as I do the neckline, it's a little difficult to figure out like what's the right curve for this because I really needed to be able to draw through that shape. So I created a new layer, drew through the shape to get the neckline that I wanted, erased that, tapered it, and then flattened that back to the drawing. So if there's ever a time you need to do like a big draw through to get that sweeping line that you need, new layer, get your stroke, taper it off, flatten it down, and that usually will work really well. Line art is a craft. It is an artwork all to itself. There are people who just ink. That's all they do. And they spend a lot of time making beautiful line work. We don't need to go crazy because it is obviously just one stage in the process. But if you learn it now and you learn what good line art is supposed to look like, then hopefully you'll get better and better at it, and you'll get it right the first time, and then it'll be beautiful. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through and just kind of erasing some of the original drawing because I want to give you just a little bit of a comparison, a little bit of back and forth, so this way you can kind of see the changes that I've made. So that's all this process is here. But if you learn to do line work, it's so odd. There are very few instructional materials out there to really teach and explain what proper line weight is. The best way to do it is to go and look at the kind of line weight that you like, whether it's your favorite mangaka, whether it's a American style comic book artist, whoever it is. Go look at them and see how it is that they treat these lines, and then just practice. Try to do it the way that they do it. Analyze it. Take the time to really critique it. What lines are thick? What lines are thin? And ask yourself why. Why is it that they would do it this way? Or why did they not include a line to represent this part of the anatomy or this part of the clothing, and where over here that they did? So you can kind of see a little bit of the back and forth now. You can see a little bit of the differentiation that I've got. A lot of it is with your line work, you just have a lot of like incidental shapes. You just have some wobbliness in some of these lines that could definitely be simplified. I'm thinking about the inside of the jacket here. In mine, I have a nice long smooth line. Yours kind of wobbles back and forth. You can see I have one little area of detail here that I've kind of pointed out. It's creating a tangent, which creates a double thick line. You want to avoid double thick lines, so either let it overlap, bring it in, just avoid tangents. Excellent. So now we have our second one. So you can see for this, I'm just kind of dimming it down so this way I can draw on top of it. Now for this line weight, one of the biggest things that I noticed about the line weight in this project is that there wasn't a lot of consistency or logic to what lines were thick or what lines were thin. You can see the top shoulder here is a very thin line, while the inside of the tunic that's going across the bust, super thick. Very, very thick. So, try to form a internal logic about what lines will be thick or what lines will be thin. There are different styles when it comes to line work. Some are extremely dynamic, where you have super thick lines and super thin lines. Some, the line work is very consistent. It's all more or less relatively the same thickness, with just minor tapering here and there. Where you land will be up to you and the kind of artwork that you want to make. But like I said earlier, I would try to find a consistent logic that you can operate by. What I typically tend to suggest is keep your thick lines, keep those to the outer perimeter, the outer contours that define the silhouette of the form, and then do your median lines for more of your basic structure of all of your different internal elements, and then keep your thin lines for the small details. If you keep that kind of hierarchy, taper as lines pass behind other lines, that will go a long way to helping you produce really good line work. One of the best things you can do to practice this is to go through and do this with traditional media. What I like to do is to start off with pencil, because you can erase it, you can kind of get a feel for what kind of lines you want, kind of train your eye and brain to create the lines that you want. So this way you know how your system works. Then from there, move on to something like a color pencil, which is far more permanent. You can't erase nearly as well, and try to do some drawings with some nice line weight with color pencil. When you've got that figured out, then go in and start trying some marker. And if you can do it with marker, you have arrived, and you never arrive, but you'll have really gained some experience, and then you can come back here to the digital world, and you won't have to do nearly as much undoing. You won't have to try quite so hard. And with practice, then you won't have to do nearly as much of that undoing. Line work isn't something that I do a ton of because most of the time I spend my time painting. But it's just really good skill to have, and it's really something you should practice because it's going to make all of your lines better. Remember, we're making artwork. We're making something beautiful. So really, we should strive to make everything beautiful every step of the way. Beautiful silhouettes. And that means every line that we lay down, we should try to make it beautiful as well. That's going to really help you in your figure drawing, gesture drawing, things like that. Always have that mentality that there are no incidental lines. Everything you put down is for the viewer and therefore should be beautiful and very intentional. There's nothing wrong with working messy. As you saw in some of the earlier processes that I've done, I worked messy, and that's great. But that is, again, just another tool. I would never show those, as a final piece of artwork. If this is going to be line work that people are going to see, then we want to make sure that every line is beautiful. So very much following the same kind of process that I did before. I noticed that the hair here, it was very, very thick on the inside, and I wasn't a fan of some of the shapes here. Everything seemed a little squarish and a little boxy. It didn't quite have that feminine feel. I'm not quite sure what happened. Somehow I feel like some of your initial sketches and some of the stuff I'd been seeing was much more feminine, and somewhere along the line of this line work, I feel like we lost some of that. So I tried not to take over your design or totally turn it into something else. I feel like I'm trying to bring back a little bit of the spirit of what I remember. So with some of this hair here, thinning out these lines, I'm trying to be much more gentle with some of the shapes, still keeping a few of those kind of squarish edges, but trying to get a little bit more of a curvature. Overall, the face seemed much more masculine than I remember from some of your earlier sketches. It almost kind of looks like a girl in disguise, maybe, or it just maybe a more effeminate guy. So a couple tricks that I've done to try to bring back some of those feminine qualities, which I'm assuming you're wanting to be there, is especially for the upper eyelashes, make that much thicker. Give the upper eyelashes a nice thick line, even if you're not delineating a whole bunch of eyelashes. Just by making it a much thicker line, it's just going to indicate and suggest thick eyelashes, which is going to make it feel much more feminine. I also experimented a little bit with some thicker lower lids, as if there's eyeliner or something there. The nose, I like how you have some rounded components here. I flattened out the nostril, so it felt a little bit in better perspective. With the mouth, you have a very dark interior to suggest the shadows of the cavity, but the lips themselves are so soft and kind of mushy shaped. I've brought back a little bit of that angular structure, which hopefully will make it feel just a little bit more feminine. And a little bit stronger. Still keeping the fierceness there and not going crazy, but definitely bringing back some more feminine qualities to it. Also emphasizing the cheekbone just a little bit more, but keeping the jaw really strong. So remember, when you're coming up with a variety of characters, you've got characters on a spectrum of, what elements are going to be more masculine or more feminine, more soft or more round. And you want to play with those very much like how you've done here. But if you do want a distinct female character that's easily identifiable, then you're going to want to make sure that you pick your battles very carefully. Choose which elements you want to be strong, which elements that you want to be soft. The decision is ultimately yours. It's always yours to make. You just want to make those decisions according to the brief of the character and what the intentions of the design of that character are. Because that's really all we're doing. We're just trying to bring out the reality or the truth of that character and who they are. So finding a balance of those things is our pleasure and a challenge. going through, adding a couple additional lines here to try to maybe give it like a little dimension or, plainer feel, maybe a little bit to the hair. But overall, I'm liking this feeling a lot more. Overall, I think it feels a little bit more consistent than some of the line work we originally had. So apply a lot of the principles that I mentioned before with the last line work, as well as think about some of the shapes that you're producing in your line work as well. And that will go a long way. Very good. Excellent start. I think you've got some really great things going here. Remember your overlaps, remember your thick and thins, remember to push and pull your shapes, and you'll do great.